Before the world called her the Queen of Blue-Eyed Soul, Dusty Springfield once whispered that there were secrets inside a small house in West Hampstead, secrets she would take to her grave. On stage, she was radiant. Her voice carried deep emotion, her smile warm and gentle. But beyond the spotlight were hotel rooms with windows kept tightly shut. Long nights filled only with the soft whir of a tape recorder and the slow rhythm of her breathing in the dark. Some say that during her most dazzling years, she always traveled with a suitcase she never opened. No one knew what was inside. An unsent letter? A reel of tape no one dared play again? Or proof of a secret that could have changed everything? Dusty Springfield left this world quietly, her voice immortal. But behind her remains a chain of questions that have never been answered. What really happened to her? Let's follow the trail. Chapter 1. The Secret Inside the West Hampstead House. Before she became the Queen of Blue-Eyed Soul, Dusty Springfield once told a journalist that there were secrets inside a house in West Hampstead, secrets she would take to her grave. No one asked her to explain, and she never did. The gray brick house sat at the end of a quiet street, but the upstairs windows were always shut, as if to keep something inside or prevent it from escaping. Inside, the sound of laughter at the dining table could turn into the crash of breaking dishes in a matter of seconds. Mary Isabel Catherine Bernadette O'Brien, the girl the world would one day know as Dusty Springfield, grew up there. Her father, Gerard, a meticulous accountant with an almost obsessive eye for detail, had once dreamed of becoming a concert pianist, but failed. Her mother, Kay, a lively party girl of the 1920s, now found her pleasures in movie theaters and bottles of liquor hidden away. A childhood friend once recalled a moment when Mary pressed her palm against a hot stove and silently watched as the red mark appeared. No one knew why. Only Mary, and perhaps one other person, understood the meaning of that burn. But a relative offered another version, saying it was nothing more than a kitchen accident. No one could prove which was true. Mary was a sensitive, quiet child. She sought refuge in her small bedroom with an old record player. In the steady click of the needle in the groove, Billie Holiday sighed. Doris Day smiled softly, and Carmen Miranda laughed from another world. Mary listened, learning how to hide pain inside a melody, and in ways she could barely name, she was drawn to the women behind those voices. There was one memory Dusty would reveal only once, many years later. At the convent school, her heart raced when a nun smiled at her. The feeling was both warm and frightening. "I knew I had to hide it," she said. And she did. Not just that feeling, but the part of herself she believed no one would accept. Her teenage years brought a quiet rebellion. Mary looked into the mirror and saw a shy girl with light brown hair and sad eyes. One afternoon, she decided to erase that image. She dyed her hair bright blonde, lined her eyes in dark strokes, and put on the most fashionable dress she owned. In the mirror, another girl looked back, bolder, more defiant. Mary O'Brien stayed behind in that house. The girl who walked out into the world carried a new name, Dusty Springfield. But the blonde hair and sharp eyeliner could not erase the past. She always carried that West Hampstead house with her, like a shadow, a relative once said. That shadow wasn't just memory. It was part of who she was, seeping into even her most brilliant moments. And someday, the door to that whisper-filled room would open. But when it did, would it lead to freedom? Or simply another room with the windows closed tight? Chapter 2. The stage door opens, and the pressure begins. The closed door in West Hampstead finally opened. But outside was not a wide blue sky of freedom. It was the glare of stage lights, a place where everyone was looking, yet no one truly saw. In 1958, Dusty joined the Lana sisters. She quickly learned how to adjust her smile, her angles, even her answers to fit the ideal image of a female singer in those days. But backstage, a former bandmate remembered, Dusty would often stand alone, fussing with her hair in the mirror, sometimes whispering to herself, as if rehearsing a conversation that would never happen. When she joined the Springfields with her brother Tom, Dusty began to draw real attention. Her voice was unlike anything the public was used to hearing. Rich, deeply emotional, as though she had lived through unnamed losses. "I don't know why I sing like that," she once said. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be standing outside the window, looking in." There was a show in Manchester in 1962 that few ever spoke about. A stagehand recalled how Dusty vanished from the dressing room just minutes before she was due on stage. When they found her, she was standing outside the fire exit, cigarette in hand, her eyes red. "Just dust in my eyes," she said, her voice trembling. No one knew what had happened out there, between the street lamps and the dark. Then came 1963, and "I Only Want to Be With You" exploded onto the charts. Dusty stepped straight into the ranks of Britain's top stars. But just as the lights shone brightest, she began to see the cracks. In interviews, Dusty often sidestepped questions about her family and her childhood. A young journalist later recalled, "She smiled, but her eyes were cold. I felt like there was a locked room behind that gaze." The pressure from the press and her record label forced Dusty to maintain the image of the perfect lady. No one knew that to achieve that flawless sweep of mascara each night, she would spend hours at the mirror as if applying a mask that allowed her to survive. And each time she removed that mask, alone in a hotel room, she would pour herself a glass of strong liquor, a habit that would slowly become a chain. By mid-1964, during a recording session in New York, Dusty laid down a demo that was never released. The sound engineer who kept the tape said that during a pause, she leaned into the microphone and whispered something unclear. It sounded like, "It's still there." No one asked what it was, and no one else ever heard it but him. That was the thing about Dusty. Every answer only led to another question. The spotlight could catch every strand of her blonde hair, every smile, but her shadow remained untouched. And so the question lingered. Could her new success ever truly drive away what she carried from that house in West Hampstead? Or would it only make the shadow longer? Chapter 3. The height of 1968, and the suitcase that never opened. In 1968, Dusty Springfield stood at the very top. Yet in every elegant hotel room, right beside the bed, there was always a suitcase that never opened. Not because she forgot, but as if that suitcase was part of her, something no one else was ever meant to touch. Even in her brightest months, Dusty carried with her an old shirt belonging to her brother Tom, neatly folded and kept in its own drawer. She said it was to remind her of who she was. But some believed it was a reminder of something else, something only Dusty and one other person knew. In America, the pressure grew heavier. The British press accused her of being too Americanized. The Americans, in turn, complained she was too British. To keep her balance, Dusty withdrew. Hotel curtains were always drawn. A bottle of gin sat on the table beside a cassette recorder. One night at Atlantic Studios, after the microphones had been switched off, Dusty remained in the dim light and quietly recorded herself whispering, "If they knew, they'd never forgive me." The engineer in the control room looked up, hesitated for a few seconds, then pressed stop. He kept that tape as evidence, though he never explained why. Work went on. Dusty appeared flawless in public, but those around her began noticing the gaps, hours when she would vanish in the middle of a workday. One engineer said he once found her sitting on a fire escape, staring blankly at the street, saying, "I just needed to hear the wind." But another staff member insisted she had never left the studio that day. No one knew who remembered correctly. In 1969, Dusty traveled to Memphis to record Dusty in Memphis, an album that would later be hailed as a masterpiece. The songs shimmered with emotion, but behind them were sleepless nights, intense arguments with producers. Dusty wanted to record songs that were too sad for the label's taste. "My music has to be real," she insisted, but real seemed to mean more than just music. Then the press began to dig deeper. At a press conference in London, a male journalist asked bluntly, "Are you in love with anyone?" The room fell silent. Cameras flashed. Dusty took a sip of coffee and smiled. "I'm in love. With music." A light ripple of laughter followed, but the air had shifted. Afterward, a friend recalled seeing Dusty tearing up several letters in her room, letters she had never sent. The stage lights still burned brightly, but the shadow inside Dusty was growing deeper, and the question became harder to ignore. Was this peak keeping her alive? Or was it quietly leading her toward a cliff no one saw coming? Chapter 4. When the spotlight became a burden. After the brilliance of Dusty in Memphis, the cracks began to show. Not everyone noticed, but those close enough could see it. The slight tremor in her hands when she signed her name. The pauses in conversation that lasted just a beat too long. Touring became heavier, almost oppressive. Backstage, Dusty would often sit alone, head bowed, listening to the tape with that whispered line, "If they knew." Once, when an assistant asked why she still kept it, Dusty simply replied, "It reminds me to be careful." Then the rumors of her unpredictable moods began to spread. A wardrobe assistant recalled seeing Dusty throw a white dress into the trash simply because it looked like a wedding dress. She offered no explanation. Another person suggested it was just an outburst from pressure. But pressure from what? No one dared to ask. One night, after a show in Glasgow, Dusty vanished from her hotel. The next morning, she returned with a scratch on her arm and a small notebook tucked into her coat pocket. No one but her ever saw inside. A close friend later revealed it contained scattered notes, a few names, and one sentence written again and again. "Don't let them know." The press began probing into her private life. At a magazine photo shoot, a reporter asked directly about her love life. Dusty smiled and steered the conversation elsewhere. But moments later, slipped into a private room. The photographer remembered, "I heard the sound of paper being torn. When I went in, the wastebasket was full of shredded letters." Around this time, the cultural divide and gender expectations within both the British and American entertainment industries made her feel increasingly cornered. In America, there were places she could not walk into openly if she was accompanied by a woman too familiar. In Britain, such a thing was even more dangerous for her reputation. During a meeting about a promotional contract, a record label representative quietly said, "If you want to keep your position, you need to keep your story tidy." Dusty said nothing, simply snapped shut her suitcase, the same one no one was ever allowed to open, and walked out of the room. Those years left her with an unusual wariness, not just toward strangers, but toward friends. A fellow singer who once toured with her recalled, "You could talk to her for hours, but the moment you touched on a certain subject, she'd go silent, like someone had just turned out the light in her eyes." The spotlight was no longer bright enough to hide the growing shadow, and the question still hung in the air. What was in that suitcase and notebook that Dusty guarded so fiercely? Chapter 5. The years in hiding, and the letter never sent. By the late 1980s, Dusty's spotlight had faded. She still sang, still appeared in public, but her tours now played to smaller concert halls, stages without the grand sweep of lights. A former colleague said, "She was still beautiful, but her eyes were different, like they were always fixed on a place no one else could see." Her small flat in West London was almost always kept in shadow, the curtains drawn tight. Neighbors said they rarely saw her outside in daylight. Instead, around 3 in the morning, the kitchen light would flicker on and the soft sound of old jazz would drift from the radio. On the kitchen table sat a cooled cup of tea, an overflowing ashtray, and the old suitcase, still locked. A close friend who visited remembered that Dusty had a habit of placing certain letters into that suitcase immediately after reading them. Not every letter, only some. And usually those from names she didn't recognize. When asked why, Dusty would simply shrug, "For later." Her health began to decline, both physically and emotionally. The coughs lasted longer, her voice grew huskier. At one recording session, the engineer recalled, she sang a line, then stopped and stared into space, not because she was tired, but like she was listening to another voice in her head. Then, in 1994, Dusty was diagnosed with breast cancer. She began treatment, but kept it private from most of the public. Some friends believed she wanted to avoid pity. Others thought she didn't want to open that suitcase, as if doing so would mark an ending she wasn't ready to face. In March of 1999, just weeks before she was to receive the OBE from the Queen, Dusty's condition worsened rapidly. A nurse who cared for her said that in those final days, Dusty often asked for the suitcase to be placed right by her bed. No one was allowed to touch it, not even me, the nurse said. One night, I saw her unlock it, look inside for a long time, then close it again without taking anything out. On March 2nd, 1999, Dusty Springfield passed away at home at the age of 59, surrounded by family and loved ones. But no one spoke of the suitcase. One source close to her claimed that after the funeral, it simply disappeared. No one knows where it went. To this day, those who knew her still wonder, in her final days, what did Dusty keep so close? Was it a forbidden love letter? A journal of a hidden relationship? Or evidence of something she had never wanted the world to see? The answer may be inside that suitcase. But now, where is it? Chapter 6. The Final Day and the Clues That Remain. Dusty Springfield's funeral was held at St. Mary's in Henley-on-Thames on a cold, gray morning. Hundreds came to say goodbye, from stars who had once shared the stage with her to fans who had followed her for decades. On her coffin, someone placed a bouquet of white roses and a vintage silver microphone, a final farewell to the Queen of Blue-Eyed Soul. But behind the solemn ceremony, whispers lingered. A church attendant recalled that before the service began, an older woman with silver hair approached and handed Dusty's housekeeper a sealed envelope. "Give this to her," the woman said, then left without giving her name. According to the housekeeper, that envelope has never been opened publicly. At the same service, a former studio employee leaned toward a journalist and murmured, "The suitcase. I'm certain it's no longer in the flat." When the reporter asked why, he only shook his head. A family member took it the night Dusty died. After the funeral, the press began writing more openly about Dusty's private life. Some articles revisited her secret relationships and her struggle with identity during a harsher era. But there were also stranger details. An unsigned letter, said to have been sent to Dusty shortly before her death, containing only the words, "If they knew," the exact phrase she had whispered on that studio tape years earlier. No one has been able to confirm whether the letter truly existed. Friends say that in her final days, Dusty often gazed out the window, as if waiting for someone. Once, when a relative asked what she was thinking, she simply replied, "I don't think they'll leave me alone." No one pressed further, and that remark became one of her last mysteries. Among her fans, theories continued to smolder. That Dusty had held evidence of a scandal within the music industry, that she had been pressured into silence, or that the suitcase contained the entire story, now hidden away forever. No one can say for certain. Only this is known. After the day Dusty Springfield was laid to rest, more than one door closed, and one of them, perhaps, will never open again. Epilogue. The legacy of Dusty Springfield, and the question without an answer. Dusty Springfield passed away on March 22nd, 1999, just weeks before she was to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The irony left many feeling bitter, as if life had conspired to keep her hidden until the very end. She left behind a body of work spanning more than 3 decades. Hits like "Son of a Preacher Man," "You Don't Have to Say You Love Me," and the album Dusty in Memphis remain landmarks of Blue-Eyed Soul. Her voice, a blend of cigarette smoke and spring sunlight, could move listeners not just through flawless technique, but through the unvarnished truth of its emotion. But beyond the spotlight, Dusty left another legacy, one far more complex, harder to grasp. It was the story of a gifted woman living in an era when difference could be punished. She kept her love life hidden, sidestepped the press, and built a perfect Dusty on stage to mask the deeper fractures within. Those closest to her say she lived in 2 worlds. One, dazzling and unshakable in public. The other, shadowed and fragile behind the scenes. Sometimes those worlds collided, in the nights she vanished suddenly from a party, or in the last-minute refusals to give an interview. Looking back, Such moments might have been clues to a story she never told. The suitcase that was never opened. The sealed envelope at her funeral. The letter with the words, "if they knew," appearing decades apart. These details drift like scattered puzzle pieces, with no one able to see the full picture. Perhaps it was all coincidence. Perhaps there was no secret beyond deeply human sorrows. But perhaps, beneath the music and the lyrics, Dusty Springfield carried something that certain people never wanted the public to know. Today, a new generation still sings her songs, still seeks out those old recordings to hear that voice, at once tender and razor sharp. But every time one of her songs plays, the question she left behind still echoes. What really happened to Dusty Springfield? And is that secret still out there, waiting to be found?